it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. Well, they say life itself is a highway, and we all travel our own roads. Some good, some bad, yet each is a blessing of its own. Tonight's story will test that theory. It's once again time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink and listen. The house that death forgot. Melinda hated driving at night. She did her best to avoid it. Short trips to the store if she just realized she'd run out of tampons or had nothing for dinner after getting home. That sort of thing happened now and then. But she did her best not to go out after dark unless someone was coming to pick her up. So, naturally, she found herself on the longest drive of her life tonight, with no moon, few stars, swirling clouds above her, and acres of forest on either side. As with so many unpleasant things in her life, this was her father's fault. She hadn't seen or spoken to the bastard in 15 years, but just after falling asleep tonight, no, that was wrong, it'd be yesterday by this time, when out of the blue her phone rang and his voice was on the other end. "I need you, Melly. Please come, now." He said just that, and then the line had gone dead. The old ass was probably drunk, but he'd never called her before, not since she was a child, and he was still trying to convince her mother to take him back. Well, it felt like she'd been dreaming, waking up to hear his voice again after all these years. It sounded like he was crying. His voice had sounded just the same as the last time she'd heard it. As though in a dream, she'd risen, dressed, and gotten in the car. She was well out of town and halfway to his old place before realizing that she had no way of knowing if he even still lived there. She received updates from her mother from time to time over the years about where he was. The last time she'd heard from her mother about him was 7 years ago. Had he ever stayed in one place that long? Well, not to her recollection. She'd been 7 when her mother finally had enough and showed him the door. Prior to that, a move had come every few months. The house they'd been living in was their longest stay in one place, a full 16 months. It turned into 2 years after that, and then the next house had been the one she'd left when she moved out on her own. In all that time, she heard from him sporadically at best, and had finally decided it was best to simply forget about him. Until tonight. She'd found out after a 2-hour drive she'd been right to wonder if he was still in the same place. His last known address was a sketchy apartment in a low-income area of the town that she'd grown up in. Had he been number 24 or number 42? Or maybe he was 14. He definitely had a 4. Well, it didn't matter. His name wasn't on any of the buzzers. Oh, bastard. A drunk of a father had called her at night, all but demanding she come to him for reasons he didn't even feel were important enough to tell her over the phone, and then just expected that she'd know where he lived now. In a flurry of rage, she turned and marched back to her car, slamming the door and starting off from the direction she'd come from. She was so angry she didn't even look where she was going and missed her turn-off. The next thing she knew, she was on this lonely stretch of road. Cars were sparse, but she took some comfort in the fact that she'd pass one every half hour or so. Her dashboard clock now read 2:27 a.m., and she'd been driving for more than 5 hours since leaving her house, at night. Every 5 minutes or so, she checked her cell phone. Ever since realizing she was lost, she checked her phone and found no bars at all. She even stopped at a gas station, closed of course. She was just sure there'd be some service around here somewhere, but nothing. Take stock of your life, Melly, she thought. You're over 30, you hate your job, you and your mother don't get along, you haven't seen or spoken to your father in just under half your life. You have no time for your friends or a relationship thanks to the aforementioned job you hate. And now, here you are, trapped on a road you've never seen before. At night, you can't even so much as call AMA, let alone check Google Maps. Smart lady you are. She briefly considered stopping and flagging down the next car that passed. She quickly realized the futility of that plan. Any car on this road would also have no service, so there was nothing for it. She'd have to drive until she saw a house. Well, she'd feel bad for waking someone up, but there was no choice. She needed to find her way back to the main highway. But so far all that she could see on either side was trees. Mile after mile of trees. No light shining through the boughs. No sign that anyone had ever been here before, except that there was a road and people were obviously still driving on it. There weren't even any road signs other than the mile markers. Had she really found the middle of nowhere? She was just in the middle of this thought when her headlights illuminated something just up the road. A square wooden sign, obviously made by someone other than the government. Now, this wasn't a gas, food, or lodging sign, or a mile marker, or a distance to sign. This looked like the kind of signs advertising a private business was nearby. She slowed down to read it. Granny Royce's Roadhouse. Come stay the night at Granny's. She'll take good care of you. Room, board, low prices, next exit. Well, her heart sped up. She certainly wasn't interested in spending a night at Granny Royce's, but every business had a phone. At the very least, she'd have a map, or know the way back to the highway. So she decided she'd stop there. She almost missed the turn. Granny Royce's Roadhouse was buried at the back of a long, dirt driveway, secluded amid the trees. She was almost past the little dirt road that led back to it before realizing it was there. She skidded to a stop and turned in. The little house lay ahead. It was 2 stories and looked to have about 8 to 10 rooms. Big for a home, but small for anything announcing room and board. She got closer and looked for a vacancy sign. Nothing. It wasn't that the sign wasn't lit. There was no sign. The porch light was on and the front of the building was illuminated by that light and by her headlights. No signs of any kind. She almost wondered if she'd gotten the wrong place, but she was certain that she'd seen no other exits between this house and the sign announcing it. She paused in the driveway and took out her cell again. Still no service. She did a quick search for any available wireless signals. To her complete lack of surprise, there were none. Not even any secured. God, there's no one here but me, she thought. At this point, she wouldn't be surprised to find the house empty as well. But the light was on, and this was supposed to be a roadhouse. Someone would be manning the front desk. She got out of the car and headed for the front porch. As she turned around to make sure the lights flashed when she hit the lock button on her fob, she thought she could see a flash of movement in the trees. Something human-shaped. Well, she stopped and looked again. Nothing. Well, she decided she'd imagined it. At the front of the door, she hesitated. If it really was a roadhouse, then she'd be able to just go on in. But what if she had got the wrong house? If she tried the door and just walked in, she could find herself arrested out here in buckfuck nowhere. Cautiously, she tried the knob. It turned. She pressed gently on the door. It opened. Relief flooded through her when she saw that she was in a small but tastefully decorated foyer that had obviously been repurposed as an admissions area. A quaint desk with an honest-to-God guest book had been placed in the far right corner, and some chairs had been set out, along with magazines on a table. She read the titles briefly. Mademoiselle, Blue Book, The New Country Life, Arts and Architecture, before turning her attention to the little desk. There wasn't a computer. That was a cute touch. It was like the house was from a past era. Perhaps old Granny Royce really didn't like modern technology. There was, however, a little bell, just like there would have been in 1929. It wasn't even the round silver kind you slapped a ring. It was a little porcelain handbell. Well, this place was starting to out-cute her. Oh, please let her have a phone. And please let it use the number plan, not 50s exchanges. She picked up the bell and gave it a shake. Well, for a while, nothing happened. Then she saw a light come on in the back room, and the shadow of an old woman sprang up on the wall. The shadow moved toward her, and within a few seconds, she saw its owner, Granny Royce, who perhaps looked like every grandmother in every storybook ever. "Well, goodness me," she said. "My lands. Good morning, dearie. Pardon my tardiness, but it's been a while since we got guests at this hour. Can I take your name, honey?" Well, Granny Royce was smallish, her grey hair tied in a neat bun behind her head, a dress that would have looked like it belonged to a senior citizen in the 20s, and a faded pink sweater. Melinda thought that she looked just like she would have wanted her own grandmother to look like, but her mother's mother had died when she was young, and she never met her father's mother. It almost hurt to deny this sweet little woman her business, but nevertheless, she had to get home. "Actually, I'm sorry," she began, "but the fact is, I'm lost. I'm not even sure where I am in the direction of." "Oh, you poor thing," said Granny Royce. "You just sit down and let me fix you some tea, or something. You must be cold." "Really, thank you, but I'm okay," Melinda said gently. "I just need to use the phone if I could, or if you've got a map, even that will be lovely. I really only live a couple of hours from here." She trailed off, not knowing if she was even right about that. She easily could have driven those 5+ hours in the wrong direction entirely. "Oh dear," said the old woman sadly. "I'm sorry, honey, but the phone lines are down. As for a map, well, I used to have one, and if I look I still might, but it's probably quite out of date by now. Well, the highway moved since then, I know that much." Melinda's heart sank. How could her luck get any worse? No phone, cell, or landline, had no map. What could she do? She had to get back home. She was expected to work at 8 a.m. tomorrow. And why were the phone lines down? The weather was coldish but clear. Were they fixing a line nearby? Well, she told Granny Royce the name of her town, but Granny only said, "Oh, believe it or not, I've never heard of that town. What'd you say the name was?" She told her again. "Nope, doesn't ring a bell. I'm sorry. I could not say which direction it's in. Why don't you stay the night, sweetie? I'll give you a discount for your trouble." "Thank you, that's very kind of you, but I have to work tomorrow and I need to get back home. I'm not even sure why I'm out tonight. The only reason I had doesn't seem to matter anymore." "Honey, I wouldn't advise trying to drive back that far tonight," Granny Royce said. "Why, it's almost 3 in the morning and you haven't had any sleep. Maybe the lines will be up in the morning and you can call your work and let them know you'll be late." "Oh, that won't work either," she replied. "I'm the opener. No one will be there. No, I'm sorry. I've really got to leave. I'll just head in the other direction until I find the road I was on." At that, Granny Royce's expression, already one of kind concern, seemed to shift somewhat to one of fear. She paused, looking at Melinda as though she wanted to say something else to keep her inside. Finally, she said, reluctantly, "All right, honey, if you're sure, just you be careful now. Don't speak to nobody till you're back on the road." Well, that last warning seemed a little silly. After all, what was Melinda, a little girl? She thanked Granny Royce for her kindness and headed back to the car. About halfway to the car, she remembered thinking she'd seen something moving in the trees. While her eyes scanned both sides of the secluded little cleared area she was in, looking for anything that appeared to be moving on its own rather than being blown by the slight wind. She saw nothing. Satisfied, she headed for her car. All 4 tires were flat. Oh, God damn it. She leaned down and saw long slash marks on each tire. Someone in this little slice of green acres had slashed her tires in the time it had taken her to find out she had no way of contacting anyone tonight. Oh, kids from a local farmhouse. Gotta be, she thought grimly. Well, nothing else to do, so you might as well go out at night and slash tires. She stopped and let the reality sink in. She wasn't going anywhere tonight. Well, she had no choice now. She had to stay the night here until morning, when hopefully the phone lines would be up and she could call someone from work to ask them to go in for her, and then AMA to get her tires dealt with. She sighed and walked back into the house. She could hear Granny Royce as she was walking back to her room. She'd already turned off the lights. Resigned to her fate, Melinda rang the bell once again. "Oh, that you, miss?" she heard Granny Royce call. "Yes, it's me," she answered. "Sorry to be a bother. My name's Melinda Orton. Sorry I never mentioned it before. I guess I will take a room for the night, if the offer's still good." "Oh, of course it is, dearie," said Granny Royce, re-entering the room and turning the lights back on. "Melinda, oh, that's such a pretty name, honey. Well, let's get you situated. You put your name and arrival time in the book there, and I'll get you a key. All the boarding rooms are on the second floor. There's only a couple left." "Well, there are others here." This was surprising. Not a single car had been in the front lawn when she pulled in. "Ah, yes, Miss Melinda." Granny was pottering around in the adjacent room. "Mr. Norris, young Calvin, there's a few of us here." She came back out with a key in her hand. "Oh, just out of curiosity, what made you change your mind?" She seemed to brighten as she asked the question, as though relieved that Melinda would stay after all. "Oh, it's probably just local kids getting kicks," she said, "but I found my tires slashed." Granny stopped suddenly, her face twisted with concern and worry. Then she resumed, as though nothing was wrong. "Oh, nothing to be done for it, I suppose," she said with an air of sadness. "Well, not until morning at any rate," said Melinda. "Then hopefully the lines will be up." "Oh," said Granny Royce distractedly. "Yes, hopefully." She led Melinda up the darkened staircase into an empty, quiet hall. Or perhaps not so quiet. From one end of the hall came the muffled sound of someone crying. Whoever it was crying softly, not with anger or petulance or fear, but with deep sadness. It sounded as if crying was something this person was used to, but they were still unable to stop. "Who's that?" she asked, pointing in the direction that crying was coming from. "Oh, pay that no mind, honey," said Granny. "That's just Mr. Norris. He's been like that a while. Older man, you understand. Not all there." She tapped her temple. "Oh, I understand," Melinda replied, but wondered privately how an old, out-of-touch man would wind up at a roadhouse. "Has he been here long?" "Oh, a while, I'd say," answered Granny. "Don't recall how long, actually." "Well, how does he pay for room and board?" "Oh, I guess he doesn't drive then," she said to the old woman. "Actually, it doesn't look like anyone else here has a car." Granny started at this, looking up with an almost guilty expression. "Oh, well," she said, "that kind of thing is the business of the guests. I don't ask about such things." She turned the key in the lock of the room she'd led Melinda to and opened the door. Turning on the light, she showed Melinda the quaint little room. Melinda thought it looked like stepping into the past. She could swear this room would have looked modern in the early 50s at the earliest. Come to think of it, so could the rest of this place, she thought. No wireless service, no computer, that old bell, and those magazines, well, they looked new, but... That thought was cut off as Granny put the key on the nightstand and started in with instructions. "Now, the bathroom's down the hallway there. You'll be sharing with the whole floor, so please bear that in mind if you have to go. There's a shower schedule on the door as well. First come, first serve. Just add your name to the first available line. That's the order the showers are in. I wouldn't worry about it if I were you, though. I'm sure you'll be first in line. I get up at 6 a.m. sharp every morning and start breakfast. You come down whenever you're ready, and I'll whip up something for you. Oh, and one last thing, my dear. I'd strongly advise you not to leave the house until sunup. Well, you just never know what could happen out there in the dark." "Of course," she replied. "I'd never go out there in the dark if I didn't have to." Well, she stopped that train of thought right out of the gate. After a few moments, she was alone. Alone without anything to wear to bed, and nothing to shower, brush her teeth, or hair with in the morning. She sat on the bed and looked out the window, which faced front. Her car still sat where she'd left it, the only thing for miles that seemed like part of her world. And an expensive, overlarge paperweight until I can get hold of someone, she thought bitterly. And despite the hominess of the room, she felt an unwillingness to rise and shut off the light. Somehow the thought of going to sleep in this backward little room seemed unthinkable. So instead she continued to sit and stare out of the window. A figure in black detached itself from the shadows of the trees and made its way to her car. What the hell? She jumped up and ran to the window. The figure was tall and seemed to be wearing a cloak made of night. She saw its arm extended. In its hands was a long, jagged dagger. It dragged the dagger across the side of her car, leaving a long gash mark in the paint and metal. "Hey!" she shouted. The figure kept dragging the dagger. She reached for the window to open it. It wouldn't budge. She looked for a lock, but couldn't see one. "Hey!" she yelled again. And this time the figure raised its head. She could see the glint of two eyes under the hood. The figure raised the dagger, slowly, determinedly. It pointed it straight at her face. Well, she leapt away from the window and ran for the door. A noise on the other side stopped her. Footsteps, dragging, shambling footsteps. And crying. The sound of a person for whom deep, longing sadness is a way of life. Mr. Norris. She waited. Somehow she just felt that she should let the old man pass before she opened the door. Before he got very far, however, she heard other footsteps, these much quicker and lighter, running up the stairs and stopping near the door to her room. "Stop it," hissed Granny Royce. "Go back in your room right now. You know better. She can't see you yet. Hopefully she won't have to at all. You get back in there. You've no business being out here at this hour anyway." What on earth? How could that sweet old woman talk to another human that way, let alone an old man with a foggy mind? Well, she almost opened the door right then, but somehow her hand stopped and waited until the shuffling, crying man had made his way back down the hallway. She heard his door open. She opened her own door just in time to see his foot, shod in a well-worn house shoe, slide into his room. The door closed softly after him. "Oh, that poor man," she thought. But now she was determined to find out what was going on. The punk outside in the Halloween costume slashing up her car, followed by Granny yelling at an old man, had made her begin to understand that not all was well here. She went back down to the front desk area, which was completely unlit except for the moonlight and porch light coming from the window. There was, however, a light on near the back room that Granny Royce had emerged from before. Melinda paused to take a look outside the front window. The maniac with the dagger was nowhere to be seen for the moment, but she was now determined that it was he that she'd seen moving from the trees. What? He could have killed me. She strode in the direction of the light, seeing that it was the light to the kitchen. She kept going, expecting to find Granny Royce still pottering about with whatever an old innkeeper did with herself during the early hours of the morning. Instead, she found Granny sitting with a young man of about 20. He had dark hair and a scruff of stubble and was wearing a dark brown corduroy shirt and khakis, along with a pork pie hat. He looked like he was ready to go sell newspapers on a street corner in the 30s. He was quietly sipping tea while Granny was admonishing him from the other end of the table. "Now that was a horrible thing to say," she said. "When I was your age, young men minded their manners." "That's a laugh, talking about my age," muttered the young man with a sneer. "Just how old are you? Do you even remember?" "Calvin Davidson, you are trouble, young man," she hissed back. Neither had noticed Melinda yet. "One of these days you're going to say something you'll regret." "Oh, come on, Granny. What could I possibly say that will make things worse than they already are?" demanded Calvin. "I mean, look at old Mr. Norris up there. Both of us are... Oh, Hello, miss. I didn't know we had anyone else here. He'd just seen Melinda. Hi, she said. She had the feeling she'd walked in on an old argument the two of them had had many times, and that did not concern her. Her fear and anger were forgotten for the moment. Calvin had been talking to Granny like a sullen kid, but something about what they were saying seemed, well, wrong. Well, can I help you, Melinda? Asked Granny Royce. Is there something wrong with your room? Well, that brought her back. No, she said. The room's fine, but nothing else is. I mean, what on earth do you even have a roadhouse out here, where it seems like no one else ever stops? Why are most of the rooms full, even though mine is the only car out there? Why did I hear you talking to Mr. Norris like he was a dog? Why would you want to make sure I didn't see it? Well, she got no further before Calvin cut her off. Oh, good Lord. She's not even been here a night and she can see it. Why did you even let her in, Granny? Why don't you just bolt the door? Hell, if I could go take down that sign, don't you think I would have done it by now? Lord love a duck. Now, there's something you don't hear many young men say, thought Melinda. She decided to ignore Calvin for the moment, otherwise. Oh, and besides that, there's someone out there. He's the freak who slashed my tires, and he's been out there messing up my car since then. You can't even call the police. I mean, are you going to tell me you've never had vandals out here before? There was a long pause in the room. Neither Granny nor Calvin seemed willing to break it. Calvin scratched at his neck. For the first time, Melinda noticed a red slash at his throat, half hidden by his collar. It looked like either a very fresh scar or a slightly healed wound. Listen, miss, I don't know your name, he finally said. Melinda, she told him. Melinda, he repeated. Melinda, I think you should sit down. I have to tell you something that you may find troubling. Melinda didn't like how he said that. She also didn't like the way his tone had switched from sullen child to serious adult. He looked several years her junior, but he was talking to her like he was her uncle or her boss. He swallowed a sip of tea and sighed. Then he looked her straight in the face and said, The reason I don't have a car out there is that when I got here, no one my age, no one in my line of work, would have owned a car. It would have seemed like an impossible dream. What are you talking about? She asked hesitantly. Well, I worked in a textile mill, he said. The mill was shut down by the time I got here. Most businesses were. So I struck out on my own, a drifter looking for what work I could find. And I stopped here. Forever. Businesses were shut down? I don't understand, said Melinda. We're having a rough time of it right now, but businesses are mostly staying open. Not then they weren't, said Calvin sadly. I arrived here in 1929. Melinda blinked. Something had exploded behind her eyes. Well, this place was new then, said Granny. My man and I had just opened it. Young Mr. Calvin was a sweet young lad of 16. I offered to take him on as hired help over my husband's objections. Well, my husband was a well-meaning man, but he knew how to pinch a penny. 'Twas a year after I took Calvin on that Mr. Royce died. Calvin and I have been here ever since. And every few years or so, someone joins us. Yep, Calvin broke in. Miss Tilly was first. She was a woman of ill repute who ran here, pregnant and scared that the man who'd run her trade up in New York was going to find her and kill her. Well, she and that baby... He broke off, now seeming on the point of tears. And then, said Granny, there's Mr. Standish. He was a traveling minister. He doesn't travel anymore. Mr. Norris got here in 69, said Calvin. His story is probably the worst. He was a bank robber, you see. Carried a pistol. He didn't like learning how long we'd all been here. He paused, stood and walked to the kitchen window. He tried to leave on his own, you see. He ain't the first to try it. That was me, actually. Well, I warned him not to try, but he wouldn't listen. But when he got outside and he met him...
Calvin, hissed Granny, we don't talk about this.
She's gotta know, said Calvin. There's no point in her finding out slowly.
Yeah, but there's still a chance for her,
said Granny in a stage whisper.
All she has to do is wait until morning.
Well, she's not going to wait until morning, said Calvin with some remorse in his voice. No one ever waits until morning. The fact that she came down here is proof enough of that. Besides, what good would that really have done her? Her car is useless. We have no phones here. There was no phone when this place went up, and there won't ever be a phone here. You know that.
Okay, everyone, stop, Melinda shouted. That's enough. Now, you can't keep me prisoner here, and I have no intention of staying any longer. Only that knife-wielding maniac out there is keeping me from running up the road this minute. Now, I need to know what's really going on here, and I need to know it now.
Look, we've been telling you, Calvin said. Granny may not want you to know everything, but you need to, because you won't believe him. Oh, we're not trying to keep you prisoner. I don't even care if you run out that door right now. But you'll never leave this house again afterward.
Like hell I won't,
yelled Melinda.
Listen, child, said Granny, rising from her spot at the table. Listen, please. None of us mean you harm, my dear. Not even Mr. Norris.
Well, there's scant he can do anymore, and he knows it. That's why he's up there crying all the time. But we're stuck here, all of us. I hope there was a chance for you to run for it in the morning, but Calvin's right. There's no guarantee you'll be safe in the morning anyhow.
What the hell is wrong with this place?
Choked out Melinda. She was beginning to break down. She could feel the tears welling in her eyes. It was about a month after Mr. Royce died, said Calvin, when he came. He was wearing that long black robe and carrying that ridiculous dagger. I saw him when I was trimming the hedges in the back. I told him he needed to get out of here because I didn't like his look. He moved so fast I never saw it coming. And he got me from here. Calvin touched his neck. To here. He touched his lower abdomen on the opposite side from the neck slash. He began to undo his shirt, and Melinda almost vomited. Under his shirt was a long, ugly slash that went deep and was still seeping blood. She could even see bone, muscle, and intestines wriggling within the mangled ruin. I died that night, said Calvin. But then, I didn't. The next thing I knew, I was being dragged into the house by Granny, and when I woke up, I nearly scared her to death. She was sure that I was gone. And the thing is, I was. But I was awake. I could talk, walk, do anything I could while alive. Well, except take any enjoyment or nourishment from food or drink anymore. Well, I still drink the tea because it keeps my skin from turning ash gray. Well, I learned that about 50 years ago. He didn't go away, though. Granny broke in. I went out to deal with him, carrying my axe. Well, he took my axe and buried it in my bag. Oh, I won't show you the wound, honey. Calvin shouldn't have shown you his, either. No one should have to see it. But, well, that's how he works, Melinda, continued Calvin. He's got that knife, but if you try to use a weapon on him, he just moves like he does and takes it from you. You never stand a chance. He'll use whatever weapon you try to take him down with to end you. Mr. Norris learned that the hard way.
This is not happening.
Melinda was ready to break down, but she had to hold it together. She had to get out of here somehow. Nothing about this was right. Nothing about it could be real. No, it was all a dream. Too much didn't make sense. Her father calling her out of the blue, her leaving to go to him without a second thought, getting lost so quickly and so irreversibly. No cell phone service anywhere on this road. This place and everything about it. She was dreaming. That had to be it. But if so, she was going to survive this dream. She turned and ran for the stairs. Her purse was still in her room, but she was going to grab it and go. She'd had enough. Protesting voices began babbling behind her, and she cared not one whit. Mr. Norris was waiting at the top of the stairs. Contrary to Granny Royce's description of him, he wasn't old at all, no more than about 40. But she saw instantly what she meant by not all there. The top half of Mr. Norris's head looked normal, like a reasonably attractive man with dark hair peppered with grey here and there. His eyes, a clear green, were moist with fresh tears. The lower half of his face was a ruin of bone fragments, shredded muscle and blood. So much blood. His left side was similarly destroyed. His arm hung on a few hanging strings of muscle. His hip was just as much a mess of bone and blood as his face was. He kept his one good hand on the banister as he shuffled toward her. Behind him stood a young woman in a bra and a pair of panties. Her stomach was cut open, and looking out of the wound with bright, intelligent eyes was the mangled remains of a baby. Melinda turned and bolted for the front door. Her hand had just closed around the knob when Calvin rushed up to her, placing his freezing cold hand over hers. "They're not going to hurt you," he said quickly, "but he will. If you step out for so much as a moment, he will kill you, and it'll hurt, and it'll go on hurting forever. After a while, you learn to function with the pain, but it never goes away." Sobbing, she asked the question she'd been afraid to ask since coming here. "Who is he?" "We don't know," said Granny from behind Calvin. "He just came here, and he won't go away. He likes to watch us and do things to incite us to come out again. As soon as someone does, he hurts them more. But no matter how many times he kills us, we won't die. Believe me when I say we all wish we could." Well, Melinda had had enough of this. She pushed Calvin away and threw open the door. He was standing on the porch. The knife was held out in front of him, just at face level. Melinda ran into him at a rush, the knife puncturing her right eye and its tip sliding on through out the other side. She just managed to see the grinning, pure white face of her killer before everything went black. A few hours later, the house erupted with screams from upstairs as Melinda awoke to a world of pain, the like of which she'd never known. The empty road seemed to stretch for eternity. It was a monotonous path, a typical highway, but unsettlingly empty this particular night. Of course, for a man who had nothing left in his life, it didn't matter. Steve tried to keep himself from thinking about his life. He had been tired, a frustrated man with a respectable but boring job. He hated everything about his workplace. Commercial stuff was never meant for him. This was a man meant to achieve more than calling people on a regular basis and trying to interest them in the stock market, only to have himself abruptly hung up on, or much worse, having his time wasted. After around 12 mind-numbing hours, he came home to an empty apartment, occupied by fancy-looking cheap decor. His wife was always thinking about saving up, always so tight when it came to spending money. "Jesus, Janie, you and I earn enough. Come on, we can afford this," Steve said to his wife. It was an old memory now, a couple of years back. Steve had taken a liking to this particular sofa. It had the most comfortable seats and a delightful little bounce once you sat on it. A glorious shade of yellow, which also happened to be Janie's favorite color, at least her first favorite color. Yellow, red, green, and then purple, Steve chuckled as he remembered. "Oh, come on, hon. There are tons of sofas out there like this. I bet we could save at least a few $100 if we go somewhere else." The memory was so clear in his mind, he almost felt the words dance around him. Her thoughts made him smile. Oh, she was a sweet woman. She had her quirks, but she was sweet. That's why he'd loved her, and then eventually married her. But that was before. That was the Janie he loved. That Janie was long gone, and instead, there was someone else he shared his bed with now. It wasn't always like that, but things change. People change, and sometimes for the worse. At first, Steve had reasoned her irritability was due to her frequent night shifts at the hospital. She'd come home tired and sleep all day. They hardly talked then. It was a little hard at first, but Steve got used to it. As time progressed, Janie had started to act dull every day. She was always tired and frequently had bursts of anger, always directed towards him. Even for the smallest things that went wrong, she began to curse at him and curse their marriage. This was especially upsetting for Steve, and over time, he started to avoid any interactions with her. It was not out of anger or of his own will. He just felt scared. He was afraid of making her angry, yet it seemed to be inevitable. Eventually, Steve had started to lash out too. Every offensive comment she made out of her anger, well, it angered Steve even worse. He began to yell at her, raising his voice like he hadn't in years, and that he'd never expected that he would ever have to again. The road seemed to stretch on forever, but he didn't care much. His thoughts kept him company. Those in the briefcase he carried with him. The music from the radio was low, just there to conceal the emptiness. Oh, he hated that feeling. It reminded him of the time Janie had started to completely avoid him. She seemed to be repulsed by his very being, not even looking over in his direction at times. Her vocabulary of colorful insults started to water down, and eventually it just consisted of and okay. He didn't know what had gone wrong. Had he not been spending enough time with her? Had he not been gifting her enough? Yes, maybe that was it. He should take her out to a nice dinner and buy her gifts. That would probably do something. It always seemed to work in the movies, and that's how their love had been. Movie love. At least, before Janie changed. As Steve's red Camry made its way through the highway, he passed through a gas station. He kept on going. He didn't need gas, not for a while, and when he would, he'd find another. So right now, he had to just keep going. Parked next to the gas station was a police car, inside which sat Officer Berg and his partner and his junior, Officer Floyd. They each had a cup of warm coffee, sipping on it between exchanging words. Berg had taken quite a liking to Floyd. The young man reminded him of himself in his own rookie days, lazy but a good learner. Maybe the reason she felt like that was because of the punch he took on her face. You should have seen it. Oh, it was crazy. All the guys just jumped at the chance to beat the hell out of that guy. If I wasn't there, he probably would have been freaking killed. Floyd said, sipping his coffee. Jesus Christ, kid. Who the hell are you lying to? I've been in this line of work long before you were at... Yeah, okay. Spare me that, old man. Someone did definitely punch him hard. Sure, kid. Quiet night, isn't it? Do you ever wonder how meaningful life can be? You truly appreciate it in slow moments like these. Maybe at your age I will. Right now, I don't give much of a shit about anything, to be honest. So just spare me all that enlightenment artsy crap. There was an awkward silence. Made Floyd feel a little guilty. Oh, man. Sorry if I came out as rude. It's alright, kid. Fuck you. The officers shared a hearty chuckle as the night went on, and they continued sipping their drinks. Steve slammed his fists on the steering wheel as he kept going. All those memories hurt to remember. The dinner, he recalled, didn't happen at all. Janie claimed to have a headache and lay in bed all night, just scrolling through her phone. After dumping the bouquet of yellow and red flowers, God knows what kind they were, he'd merely mentioned yellow and red to the lady at the shop. He walked to the pub and called Janie to let her know he'd be out all night. He decided to drink himself to sleep that night. He didn't know where he would end up, but at this point he would gladly go to bed on a train track with a billion little spiders crawling underneath him, then go home and sleep. There was also that. Janie didn't even sleep in the same bed anymore. She would much rather prefer the couch or go work an extra shift than lay next to him. She'd also started to lock the doors when she changed or had a shower, which was just a minor inconvenience as compared to everything else at this point. That night he stumbled to his friend's place, drunk and stumbling. Glenn was single, and he was the last person who would comfort him. He was the only friend he had who would let him stay. Divorce her. That's all the advice he ever got. But how could he? He still loved her. Oh, fuck this. Fuck all this. Steve let out a loud yell. Oh, fuck you. Fuck all of you. He then desperately reached for the radio, which he turned up a little louder. And now we will present you with some of the most romantic. He switched the channel. That was the last thing he wanted to hear. The mixed feelings he had for her already plagued him as it is. He didn't want to listen to the news either, so he kept changing the channel until he heard the sound of a man laughing through the radio. The laugh was wild, and it echoed and sounded as if it was two laughs coming out at once. It was a deeper voice with an audible rasp, and it felt strangely terrifying as well as soothing at the same time. The mixture of emotions he felt now annoyed him, and he spoke out softly. Go ahead, laugh at me. Go on, keep at it, he said to the voice on the radio. The laugh went on for another second, then abruptly paused. This was a weird coincidence, nothing more. Oh, Steve, but it is hilarious, isn't it? How everything turned out to be? The voice on the radio said back. Steve was so shocked, he stopped his car abruptly, and his tires skidded a little, causing the car behind him to drift sideways and almost off the road. Steve heard nothing for a moment, but then, while the man from the other car stopped and struggled to move out of his seatbelt, the voice spoke again. Drive. Drive. The voice began to ring over and over, like a corrupted radio. As the man reached Steve's window, Steve sped off in a hurry. There wasn't even a glance in the man's direction, which offended him a little. In his rage, he got his phone out, and while he thanked God for being unharmed, with shaky fingers, he dialed the police. 23152. Possible drunk driving in progress. Any units in that area, please copy. This is Officer Burke. I copy. The transmission had left Burke excited. It always did. It seemed like another chance to teach his junior something. Like a father and son at work in the garage. Okay, kid. You ready for some action? Hell yeah, man, Floyd replied, a hint of sarcasm looming in his tone, but Burke didn't mind. Their car moved out of the gas station, and Burke turned on the sirens as Floyd started to drive. Hey, say something. The voice on the radio had gone silent for a moment, leaving Steve all alone in that dreaded silence. Steve was about to turn the radio off when the man spoke out again. Oh, Steve,
Such an impatient man, aren't you? Do you think that's why Janie cheated on you? Fuck you. You hear me? Fuck you. You're not even real. I'm going crazy. I'm losing my mind, and that's it. Even though he begged for a response, he was regretting it now. These words were digging deep into his sanity and clawing at it. I'm not real. Oh, you're smarter than that. You know I'm real. Oh, I'm more real than that kiss your wife shared with. What's his name again? Oh, yes. Benjamin, was it? There was so much pleasure in his voice. It was sickening. Steve had more anger in him than fear at this point. What are you gonna do, Steve? I love you, Steve. You are the only man who understands me. The voice had mimicked Janie so well. For a moment there, Steve thought she'd spoken them herself. Please, stop. Steve could only muster a whimper. Maybe you still care. Am I wrong? I do love her. I love her so much. And what is it you want most right now? The sounds of police sirens interrupted the little moment of silence in the car, and Steve stepped on the gas. You know you'll always suffer, Steve. Pain will follow you like a shadow. Oh, fuck me, Benjamin. Oh, yeah. Do it right, Doc. It mimicked her voice again. It was so perfect and so lifelike, it made Steve's gut turn. This made Steve snap. He abruptly turned his car around and drove off the road and into the dirt beside it. His car almost tipped over the side, and lucky for him, it didn't. There was damage from the sudden jump, and Steve knew he'd hurt his back. However, his rage masked the pain, and he didn't care. Oh, fuck you. That was so long ago. She never had an affair with him, not while we were married. Stop messing around with my head, whatever you are. Steve was fuming with rage now. He wanted to smash the radio to pieces, but he restrained himself. He wanted to hear. Oh, how she left him in favor of a young man with a more promising career. Broke her heart the same way as yours is right now. Steve felt anger, replaced with fear. There was now a slow realization, but he didn't fully accept the truth, choosing instead to remain in denial. What do you mean? He said, stuttering, like the same way he did when he was a scared little schoolboy. Oh, you see, my dear friend, memory is the worst torture device. It can drive a person mad. All they need is someone to give it to them. The voice began to chuckle a little, then burst out into a full laugh. It laughed louder and louder. Oh, you son of a bitch. Steve walked out of the car and opened its trunk. He picked up the shovel he'd stored in there and the gun he'd also brought along. He began his walk back, but was interrupted. Sir, put your weapons down. State police, Floyd said loudly, in an attempt to impress his superior, and turned back to Burke and winked. Sir, are you okay? Steve ignored it and walked away from the car and dug his shovel in the ground and started to dig. I'm sorry, Janie. I'm so sorry. I'm coming to be with you. The laughter in the radio continued. Steve didn't care anymore. He just kept digging. What the fuck is wrong with this guy, huh? Floyd asked Burke. Let me talk to him. Stay back. I got this, Floyd said in his cockiness, walking down towards Steve, who kept digging, and then walking back towards the car, his eyes focused on the ground, his lips moving while he murmured to himself.
Floyd pointed his gun at Steve. "Get on the fucking ground." Steve then reached into his jacket pocket, and this sent Floyd into a panic. He shot Steve right over the elbow, sending him down into the dirt. Burke cussed and radioed for backup. Meanwhile, Floyd went to check on the bleeding Steve, who was bleeding from the shoulder, all the while muttering the same thing over and over. "I'm sorry, Janie. I'm coming. I'm coming. I'm sorry, Janie." "What?" Floyd asked, and then for a moment, Steve looked Floyd right into his eyes, and then shot him right through the pocket of his jacket, right in the head, sending him down to the ground, the life moving out of him like the smoke from his open skull. Steve struggled to stand up and kept murmuring, while Burke tried to charge at him from the road, just falling down in the dirt instead. Steve just fired at Burke casually, luckily missing him completely and not killing him, like he'd intended to, but he didn't care. Steve reached for the trunk and pulled out the lifeless corpse of Janie, completely naked, wrapped in a white towel. She looked so peaceful, like an angel. He remembered the first time they'd made love. It was awkward but magical. Right on the hood of his car under the blanket of the stars. And funnily enough, it was a night just like this. He placed her in the hole he'd dug for her and removed his jacket, putting it around her lifeless body and then reaching in for a kiss. Their lips touched. Steve didn't care. He was going to be with her again. Burke pointed his gun at Steve, warning him again, but Steve instead looked at Burke, a strange, tranquil smile on his face, as he raised the gun to his head and shot himself through the skull once. He fell down at Burke's feet instead of his back, and into the hole with Janie's lifeless corpse. Burke could see the man still smiling, while blood dripped down the side of his head from his temples. He was at peace as the bullet hit him, and that last look was the only thing remaining on him now. To Burke, this just showed the man's insanity. He heard the police sirens and withdrew his gun. It would be an offense to shoot the man again, no matter how enraged he was. He was sent off in an ambulance to spend the rest of the night, and possibly a few days, in the hospital, while the other officers on the scene inspected the madness that had unfolded here. 3 bodies, 1 confirmed murder, 1 possible murder, and 1 confirmed suicide. Their suspect carried nothing but a .22 pistol and a shovel, from what was gathered. The car was empty, besides a few strands of hair from what was presumed to be the body of the female victim. The radio was turned to loud, and for some reason, it had rested on nothing but static. So a couple of road-based stories for you there. Always a very evocative theme, very fertile ground to search around for a good story. Did you like those? I did. Well, I always say, don't I? I only read stuff that I personally enjoy, even if it's not quite a fully formed story. If I think there's something there, a little kernel of interest, intrigue, or I think the writer is on the right lines and they could have a promising future, then I read it. And I really like those too. Very creepy. Always very creepy place, isn't it? The open road. Well, my dear friends, that is it for another night. Will I be back again soon? Of course I will. Until then, very, very, very sweet dreams. And bye-bye.
Thank you so much for choosing to spend your time listening to me. Now, if you enjoyed the Dr. Creepen experience, then come find me on Facebook. Come chat with me on Twitter. Listen to the background music and download it if you like on SoundCloud. Drop by the store, pick up a t-shirt. And, importantly, if you've got a story you'd like me to read, send it to Dr. Creepen's Vault, the subreddit I set up so that I could read your stories. Now, looking forward to seeing you all again real soon. So, come check me out, okay?